just a quick review from last week. We talked about our theology of the body. And sort of where we landed with that was, just for the 1-minute version, is first of all, we talked a little bit about the cultural approach to the body. And it's this weird juxtaposition where, on the one hand, bodies are totally important and you should be obsessing over them and they have to be perfect. And if you're a guy, you need to be ripped, and if you're a woman, you need to be kind of curvy. But at the same time, bodies are not important at all. And they're just kind of shells for you to live your best life out of and to be tools and live the most out of life with. So, it's like, well, those can't both be true because one cancels out the other. So in our own theology, in Christian theology, we start with the creation story, and we just get the truth that our bodies are good. That's a better place to start out from. This week, we're talking about marriage. And we will walk through, what do we believe about marriage? And what I'm always surprised by is, and we'll talk about this more in just a minute, but marriage is something, especially the theological approach to marriage. Now, any of y'all who have been married or are married, you know a lot about marriage. You know more about marriage than me, and I should be sitting down and taking notes. But whenever I do premarital counseling with people, one of the things that quickly strikes me every time is like, oh man, these people do not know what kind of promises they're about to make. I don't think anybody walks down the aisle knowing what they're promising to do. So, yeah. Anyway, but we'll talk once again kind of about like everybody. It's something that everybody thinks they know all about, and yet. Theologically, I think a lot of people have no idea what they're talking about. And the best example I can think of to illustrate that point, has anybody ever seen a bumper sticker like this? Biblical marriage equals one man plus one woman, the only covenant that our Creator will bless. This is how a lot of times in our culture, politicians and preachers and everyday Christians will talk. And use that term biblical marriage or Christian marriage pretty freely, not just in relation to cultural discussions about same gender or same sex marriage, but other issues as well. And setting aside whatever arguments we want to make, it's worth asking, like, what is biblical marriage, or what is Christian marriage? And is it what we think it is? So as we study the topic together, we're going to find that Christians do have a deep theological tradition related to marriage. It's not one that's going to fit very well on a bumper sticker. So the way I wanted to start off with that is sort of this challenge. Well, actually, I want to start with prayer. That's the next thing. So this is a prayer from C.S. Lewis, and I think it's one that maybe egotistical people like me should pray a lot more. So let's pray. From all my lame defeats, and oh much more, from all victories that I seemed to score, from cleverness shot forth on your behalf, at which angels weep and audiences laugh, from all proofs of your divinity, you who would give no sign deliver me. Thoughts are but coins. Let me not trust instead of you their thin-worn image of your head. From all thoughts, even from thoughts of thee, O fair silence, fall and set me free. Lord of the narrow gate and the needle's eye, take for me all trumpery, lest I die. Amen. So I want to start with that topic of like assumed knowledge, that we all think we know way more about what biblical marriage is than we probably realize. And I was thinking about like, what would be another topic where we think we know way more than we do, or at least some people do. Think they know way more than they do. Yeah, Regina?
Christmas.
Oh man, Christmas. Yeah. I think I may have been talking to Regina about this, but it was someone here at St. John's. I have an Advent series that sooner or later I'll do. It's called The Four Nativities, because really what we have are a collection of stories about Christmas, and we just mash them all together, and it's the nativity scene. Congratulations. And And there's nothing wrong with that. There's something kind of benign about that. I like it too, but it's kind of nice when we unpack those different stories from the Gospels and one from the book of Revelation with a dragon in it, and appreciate them as the Christmas stories that they are. I was also thinking about, like, to go outside the world of the Bible, I was thinking about survival. Like, how many of y'all think you could survive fairly well if you needed to? Getting a lot of no's here. A few yeses. Okay. So, all right, desert rats. This is called Lost at Sea. And this is how this scenario is set up. I want you to, this is something you'll do it with either first on your own and then you're going to do it with your table. But here's the scenario I want you to think about. And then I'm going to hand you out the worksheet for it. Okay. So first of all, today's topic is marriage. And like I said, most of us, especially if you have been married, you know at least something about marriage. And we've also grown accustomed to the pastors and politicians, everybody else telling you what marriage is supposed to be. What we may not realize is that as long as there have been humans walking the earth, our concept of marriage has been changing over time and has never stopped changing. Furthermore, what we think we know about marriage, much like what we think we know about survival, might be overstated sometimes. So here is the survival scenario. You have chartered a yacht with a few friends, the people at your table, for the trip of a lifetime across the Atlantic Ocean. So congratulations, you've done well in life. Because none of your experienced sailors, you have hired an experienced skipper and crew. Unfortunately, in the middle of the Atlantic, a fire has broken out on your yacht. And in fighting the fire, that skipper and that experienced crew have been killed in the blaze. Much of the yacht is destroyed, and it is slowly sinking now. Your location is unclear because vital radio and navigational equipment has been damaged in the fire. But as far as you can tell, you're hundreds of miles away from any shore. You and your friends have managed to save 15 items, which you'll find on this list, undamaged and intact after the fire. In addition, you have salvaged a rubber life raft and a box of matches. Your task is to rank these 15 items in order of importance for you as to how they will play into your survival, okay? And so 15 is the least important item on this list. 1 is the most important item. That's how you'll do it. And so I'm going to hand out the list now. You have about 5. Do this first on your own. Rank what you think is most important to least important on your own. Don't overthink it. Wednesday night people had a very hard time with this, but you really have only about 5 minutes to rank these things, so you can make some snap judgments, all right? Okay, now take your list and join the people at your table, and you need to make one group list. So I'm going to give you a little longer because there's going to be a little bit of discussion and negotiation. You've got 7 minutes for this round, okay? All right, let's come back together. How are y'all feeling about your survival chances? Okay. Just take a peek here. Okay. All right. I'm going to list them in ascending order. So we'll start with the most unimportant and go up to the most important. Okay. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to write the number down on the coast, because here's the thing. This activity, they took this scenario and the list to the U.S. Coast Guard, and they had the Coast Guard rank these things. And that's the right answer, okay? And so if something is number 15, rate it number 15, and then I'll let you score it in a minute, okay? So going in backwards order, number 15 is a sextant. A sextant is useless without relevant tables and a chronometer. Right? Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay, number 14. A quantity of mosquito netting. There are not mosquitoes in the middle of the Atlantic. And the netting is not useful for fish unless a fish is going to just swim it. Would you like walk into a net that you could clearly see? So the mosquito netting is not really particularly useful. Fish net is different. Okay, number 13. Maps of the Atlantic Ocean. Not useful unless you know where you are or you have the navigational equipment. Number 12. A small transistor radio. Would likely be out of range of any radio station. Number 11. One bottle of 160 proof rum. What's that? Okay, well, yeah, I kind of guess it depends on your attitude. But
we have a pyro over here that says it's good signaling.
okay, you could do that. You could do that. Contains, now you'd want to not do it on the rubber life craft, but and you do have matches. You did have a pack of matches in there. I mentioned that at the start. Okay. Yeah, so contains 80% alcohol, so you can use it as a disinfectant, but not really useful for much else. You wouldn't want to drink it because it'll cause your body to dehydrate, which is the opposite of what you want to survive. Number 10, a can of shark repellent.
Is that real?
I have no idea. By the way, if I were taking this, I would score pretty poorly. So I don't know, but it would repel sharks if it exists. All right. Let's agree on that. Number 9, a floating seat cushion. Useful as a life preserver if somebody falls overboard. Number 8, 15 feet of nylon rope. Could be used to lash people or equipment together or prevent being washed overboard. Other uses too, but none that are really all that high on the list for survival. Number 7. Where is number 7? Oh, here we go. An ocean fishing kit with pole. Ranked lower than the chocolate as there is no guarantee of catching fish. You know, bird in the hand is worth two in the bush and all that. A pole could also be used as a tent pole for shelter.
Or raise your
Yes.
plastic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Number 6. 2 boxes of chocolate. A high-calorie reserve food supply. In World War II, Hershey's contribution to the war effort were these great big old honking blocks of chocolate that they would put in life rafts for people who had to ditch in the ocean. George Bush Sr., when he survived on Hershey chocolate bars while he was floating around waiting for someone to rescue him. Yeah. And yeah, it feels good to eat chocolate when you're stressed out. That too. Number 5, 20 square feet of opaque plastic sheeting. Can be used to collect rainwater and shelter from wind and waves. Number 4, a case of Army rations. This is your basic food intake. Number 3, a 25-liter container of water. Vital to restore fluid through perspiration, lost through perspiration. 25 liters will supply water rations for a few days. So we're in the top 2 here. Here's number 2. Number 2, a 10-liter can of gasoline oil mixture. The second most critical item for signaling. The mixture will float on water and can be ignited using the matches. Am I seeing a table that made sure they brought their shaving mirror with them?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, for sure.
All right. Number 1 is a shaving mirror. Of all items, the mirror is absolutely critical. It's the most powerful tool you have for communicating your presence in sunlight. A mirror can generate 5 to 7 million candle power of light. The reflected sunbeam can be seen even beyond the horizon. So here's what you do next. On that column on the right, You can choose your group ranking or your personal ranking, whichever one you feel better about. But write in the difference between that one and the real answer, and don't do any negatives because you want to add this up. That's going to be you're just looking for the difference between the two. But go ahead and list the difference down that column and add it up at the bottom for your total. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And here we go. Did any of y'all, your difference add up from 0 to 25? Okay, that would have been excellent. You demonstrated great survival skills, rescued. Anybody 26 to 32? Okay, well that would have been good. Above average results, good survival skills, rescued. Anybody here get 33 to 45? Okay. Average. Seasick, hungry, tired, but still rescued. Did anyone get 56 to 70? Okay. That's fair. Oh, I did. I skipped one. 46 to 55. That's fair. Okay, 46 to 55. Dehydrated and barely alive. It was tough, but rescued. Okay, 56 to 70. Who were my 56 to 70s? Poor. Rescued, but only just in time. Anybody 71 plus? Okay, here's what it says. Oh dear, an empty raft washes up ashore on a distant beach, weeks after the search has been called off. Okay, so how did y'all do? Were there any surprises? Did your perception of wilderness survival skills differ from reality? How do y'all feel about your performance there?
Well, I'm not sure if I should use minus or plus.
Oh, if you have any minuses, just erase the minus and add up the total sum. So, and that'll tell you what your real score is. The minuses will kind of throw you off, in fact. So just pretend there's not a minus in front of it. Yeah.
But we're landlocked here.
Yeah. If I gave you an activity about snakes and dust storms and crazy people out in the desert, you probably would have done way better, right? But maybe there's a lesson there for also what we know about marriage, right? Is if you know the lay of the land, maybe you survive it a little better, right? So, something you learn more about with experience. Here's another question I'm always curious about. How many of y'all, the group list was better or did better than the individual list? Okay, that's pretty typical because as it turns out, like the collective knowledge usually helps steer the process a little bit in the right direction, okay? So maybe, talk to people, when you're struggling with something in marriage, talk to people who have been that way before. And so, let's start talking about another survival scenario, which is marriage. If you've been married, this can be rhetorical, but you can answer if you want. What are some unexpected things you learned along the way? And how did you manage, or how did expectations differ greatly?
There's so many, Josh.
Yeah.
Like our systems of handling bills differ greatly.
Oh my goodness,
Money.
Yeah, money. Is one a spender and one a saver? Oof, that's rough.
Yeah.
My brother and his spouse, one of them's a spender and one of them's like a super spender. So it's, yeah.
I think I learned more confidence through being married.
That's really good. I like that. Yeah.
I really do. I mean, I came away feeling, I feel like I can do almost anything.
Right.
Which I didn't when I was 30.
Right. Okay. Okay, good. I like that.
I'm a much better fighter now.
Okay. All right. And that's funny, but I bet you mean that very seriously. Like you learn conflict resolution by being married. including the fighting, like argument. So,
Or just your strength.
Yeah.
What it takes to get something different
Yeah.
than somebody else.
well, like a similar observation about church. Churches where there are no conflicts are scary places to be because that just means no one cares. If there's no conflict in your church, then you should be worried. If disagreements are coming up, there's much like in marriage, you can fight too much. There's an unhealthy conflict too. So as we begin our conversation about the Christian theology of marriage, it's really hard to separate what's the conventional wisdom from the actual biblical teaching. Just as some of us assumed our ability to prioritize emergency supplies and activity, we often think we know what the Bible says or the church teaches about marriage, and often people can confuse that conventional wisdom for the biblical word. Here's an example. Got 4 statements here. Which one is in the Bible? The Lord works in mysterious ways. Be in the world, but not of the world. This too shall pass. God will not give you more than you can handle. Anybody think it's that first one? What about the second? Okay. The third? The fourth? None of those things are in the Bible. Okay? Now, there may be some similarly worded things or kind of in the same theme or something like that, but and others are part of the church speak, things that we say around church all the time, so they probably sound familiar from Bible study or something, but that means they're being confused for biblical quotation. The same is true when it comes to marriage. This is something new I'm adding in this year, but I found this skit. This is an old Saturday Night Live skit, and it's one of my favorites. And it's called Common Knowledge. Okay, so I think you'll pick up on the theme pretty quickly here. So here we go. Steve Martin. All right, I want you to remember that phrase at the end. It's not what you know, it's what you think you know when we start walking into this talk about what the Bible says about marriage. Because really when we say the biblical concept of marriage, a lot of times it's really what's in our mind is really a mix of the biblical text and sometimes church teachings or conventional wisdom and things that dear old Aunt Mabel or Uncle Henry used to say. Unlike the contestants in the game, it's important to separate what we think we know is in Bible or church teaching from what's actually there. Beyond our everyday attitudes and assumptions, our Christian theology of marriage has evolved over time. And so let's start looking at what it means. When I started thinking about this, I thought, well, where do we encounter biblical teaching on marriage? And I think the easiest place you could go is weddings. So a few years ago, think about some of the texts you've heard preached at weddings that you've been to. Lifeway Research, which is the Baptist Church's publishing arm, they did a survey of pastors in 2018 and asked them, which texts do you tend to preach on the most at weddings? And this is the list that they came up with. And I'll just tell you as an aside, most preachers ask couples what they want as a text. It's usually chosen by couples. And so here's the top 4 that they chose. The first one is 1 Corinthians 13. You all know this one. It's the love chapter. Love is patient, love is kind. If I could speak in the tongues of angels and blah, blah, blah. It's the famous love chapter. Blah, blah, blah. That's what Paul said. Okay. Love is patient, love is kind. That's great advice for marriage. But Paul's not talking about marriage when he wrote it. He's talking about a church conflict. And he didn't necessarily intend it to be understood in that context. The believers in Corinth had split into factions and were competing for prestige and influence. And so he's saying, you want to be a people of love, you got to be patient and kind and gentle and all of that. And you kind of see that when you read chapters 12 and 14 of 1 Corinthians, is the broader context that they're talking about. Ruth 1:16, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God. Is that a story about marriage? That's a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, Ruth and Naomi. And so, not bad, but Ruth is addressing her mother-in-law when she says this. Genesis 2:24. And then Jesus quotes this in Matthew and Mark, which is actually where I tend to hear pastors preach from. Therefore, a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And this passage is certainly appropriate to marriage as it reflects the sort of level of intimacy when it comes to and commitment that distinguishes marriage from other relationships. Jesus does quote this passage too, only when he is quoting it, he's not talking about marriage. He's talking about divorce. And I, for one, would rather not go to a wedding and hear about divorce. So once again, we kind of take it a little bit out of context. And then this last one, I don't know that you'd ever hear this one read in a United Methodist church, but this was a Baptist church survey, Baptist pastors. Less commonly heard in Methodist churches, Paul commands wives to submit to their husbands. But if we really want to take this passage seriously and literally, it's worth noting that Paul enjoins wives to submit to their husbands as a child submits to a parent or a slave to a master. And even most of the compatibilist Christian, compatibilist Christians means that men and women are compatible but different and one submits to the other. Complementarian Christians believe that men and women are equal in a marriage. I'm a complementarian. No. Yes, I'm a complementarian. Even the compatibilists that I know, though, wouldn't say that their wives ought to relate to them like a child or a slave. So the point is that very often what we see as biblical wisdom on the subject of marriage is largely made up even of texts that we take out of context and apply in ways that the original writers never would have intended. Does that mean it's wrong to use love is patient, love is kind as good teaching for marriage? Of course not. Those are good things to carry into a marriage. At the same time, we ought to be self-aware of a passage's context. As the old saying goes, a text without a context is a pretext. And on a side note, what if we did take that Corinthians 13 passage and apply it to, I don't know, certain Wesleyan denominations that are fighting like cats and dogs over the subject of marriage and sexuality? Maybe we can learn something from that. Be more patient, more kind. So what does the Bible say about marriage? Well, first of all, a little bit of historical background. When it comes to the church, so I'm not talking about Jewish history, pre-Christian history, but for the first 5 or 6 centuries of the church's existence, Christians didn't do marriages. It was a Roman civil institution. It was something you went down to the Roman local official to have performed. And it wasn't seen as bad or negative or anything. It's just it was civil. It was like paying your taxes or something. It was not part of the church's life. It wasn't until the fall of the Roman Empire that Christian clergy persons started doing marriages at all. And the reason for that was you needed someone who was literate who could keep a record. Back when the Roman Empire was around, there were great record keeping about who was married and who wasn't and all that. But it tended to be the priest or the clergy person in every town or village who was the one who could read and keep track. And you didn't want someone getting married and going 2 villages over and getting married again. You wanted someone who could check on those kinds of things. That's why Christians started doing weddings. But lots of Christians were married. That's not to say that Christians didn't marry. It just wasn't part of the religious life. So what does the Bible say about marriage? And we're going to go through several texts here. You can use your phone for this, or you can, I do have one extra paper copy if you need a paper copy of the Bible. Let's go through some of these. This is not an in-depth study. This is a survey that we can do in a couple of hours. So there's lots more that we could go through. But let's look at biblical marriage here, okay? And as we do, I want you to ask some questions or think about some questions. What does the text teach about biblical marriage? Do we or should we still follow that teaching, and why not? What does it tell us about the world of the Bible? What does it tell us about our world? So let's start with Deuteronomy 7, 3 through 4, and there's another one that goes with it, that 2 Corinthians verse. Would someone pick out the Deuteronomy one and someone pick out the 2 Corinthians verse? And when they have it, just start reading it for us.
Deuteronomy is, do not intermarry with them.
Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you.
Okay, so what does that text teach about biblical marriage? Yeah, if you're a Jew, don't marry a non-Jew. Stay in your lane. I like that. That's good. Do we or should we still follow that teaching? You got to understand, up until about 50, 60 years ago, anti-miscegenation laws in the South were written with this text in mind, that you should not marry outside your tribe or your race. Okay?
But it's really about apostasy.
Yes. Okay, so the reason it's written is very much part of where Israel lives. They are this little tiny kingdom in the middle of a lot of big empires and a lot of little tiny kingdoms also around them. And all of those other kingdoms were polytheists and idol worshipers and all of that. And so what Moses is trying to teach here is if you're going to marry an idol worshiper, you probably will start worshiping idols too, or at least dabbling in it a little bit, which they do. That proves true. We're the ones who took that text and took it out of its context and said, oh, yeah, this is talking about blacks and whites, and black people and white people and things like that, and used it inappropriately. What's 2 Corinthians 6:14? Kind of goes with it.
Do not be yoked together with unbelievers, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common, or what fellowship can light have with darkness?
Yeah. So once again, biblical teaching is don't marry a non-Christian. We could have that discussion, but I'll just tell you, I don't do a lot of marriages where both people are of the same faith. That's just not the world we live in right now. So you could take these texts and also rightly notice that there are other passages. So Galatians 3:28 and Colossians 3:11 emphasize that there's neither Greek nor Jew. Furthermore, there are biblical protagonists who don't marry Jews. Moses doesn't marry a Jew. Ruth doesn't marry a Jew. They're portrayed in interracial marriages. And like I said, this is because Israel lives in a bad neighborhood, is really what this text is about, is they're surrounded by all these different pagan cultures. The lesson is to keep the community strong and united in their devotion to the Lord. Interracial marriage is at best something that's kind of an aside of this. It's not really what the text is about, but we have used it very badly in history. Okay, so let's keep going. 1 Corinthians 7, 8, and 9. Whoever finds that, if they would just raise their hand and have you read it. Yeah, go ahead.
Now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I am. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion.
All right, so what does the text teach about biblical marriage?
For sex.
Yeah, don't do it unless you're just too horny not to, is basically the point, okay? Do we or should we still follow the teaching? No, we actually in the church, we kind of encourage marriage, right? It's something we like. What does it tell us about the world of the Bible? Well, that's very instructive because by Paul's guess, Jesus is coming back any day now. Like maybe Jesus will come on Tuesday, but maybe he'll wait all the way till Thursday to come back. You had no concept of it being 2,000 years later, and we're still in this expectation of Christ's return. And so he's saying, why would you make your life more complicated when we're kind of at the end anyway? Let's just, let's keep what we're doing and be devoted to God. And then when Jesus gets here, we'll all be ready. Marriage might be a distraction he's sort of lifting up. But yeah, 2,000 years later to modern readers, the teaching sounds really strange. And I'll also just point this out to conservative evangelicals. It seems like this is the only time they don't want to take Paul very literally. Okay, this one they would just as soon kick into the background. Matthew 2, 18 and 19. This is a marriage story that's part of a much larger story.
it, but it doesn't make sense.
Okay, go ahead. Oh, I think I know why, because I think I wrote down, can you look up 1, 18 and 19?
Okay, Matthew.
I think this is a typo.
Okay.
This came up on Wednesday. A smarter person would have just fixed it, but there you have it.
I have it.
Okay.
This is the story of the birth of the Messiah. Mary, his mother, was betrothed to Joseph. Before their marriage, she was, 1819. Before their marriage, she found that she was with child by the Holy Spirit. Being a man of principle and at the same time wanting to save her from exposure, Joseph desired to have the marriage contract set aside quietly.
Okay. So this is a story about a marriage. And I'm sure you've all heard Christmas sermons that talk about,
Quick question, this one doesn't say that. This one says he had in mind to divorce her quietly.
Yes. Yeah, same difference there. Yeah.
Wait, marriage, did you say? I thought
He
you just
was
said.
going to set the marriage contract aside.
Yeah. Yeah, because first of all, marriage it was something that families did. It wasn't something that two people did. So this family had a child who's eligible and this family did, and they're like, well, we like each other and let's make an advantageous property transaction here, basically. Yeah, and so once you were betrothed, you knew who your wife was, and it didn't change. And to me, this is a great, and like I said, you all have heard Christmas stories, or Christmas sermons that talk about this. That Joseph, he could follow the biblical marriage model here, which includes going to Leviticus 20:10, and the proper punishment for and by the way, he doesn't know that this is a miraculous birth. He thinks she's gotten pregnant the old-fashioned way. All right. And Leviticus 20:10 says, if your wife is unfaithful, she can be stoned. But he doesn't do that. So already you see that within the biblical concept of marriage is we're going to pour a lot of grace into the biblical concept of marriage. There's a self-correcting mechanism within that. I like the way that Fred Craddock writes about this story. He says, Joseph loves his Bible, and he knows his Bible, and bless his heart for it. I am absolutely amazed that Joseph is the first person in the New Testament who learned how to read the Bible. Like Joseph, we are to read the Bible through the spectacles of grace and the goodness and the love of God. So what do the stories say about marriage? I don't know, but I think it also says a lot about law versus grace. Reading the Bible should always be done through the lens of kindness and grace. Those are our spectacles that we read with. But maybe there's also some good observations for that. Maybe that's a good observation for marriage as well, that kindness and grace are probably, has that worked out well for y'all if you've been married, to bring kindness and grace into it? Deuteronomy 22, 28 through 30, and I will tell you up front, this is a hard one to read. It's kind of an ugly story, or kind of an ugly teaching.
If a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her and they are discovered, he shall pay her father 50 shekels of silver. He must marry the young woman, for he has violated her. He can never divorce her as long as he lives. A man is not to marry his father's wife. He must not dishonor his father's bed.
Okay. So it's kind of hard to find anything redeeming about this one, right? Because that's a very different world that we're talking about than the one we live in. In it, the Lord commands that if a man rapes a woman, he is to pay this woman's father. What is he paying for? Damage of property. Okay? And that the woman is to marry the man. Do you really want to follow this teaching and say, where's all those bumper stickers that say biblical marriage, one man plus the woman that he raped, the only blessing, the only marriage God will bless? There's lots of other strange ones that seem strange to us. There's Levirate marriage, where if an older brother dies, the younger brother has to come forward and marry. And you got to understand, this is because how we think about marriage is just fundamentally different than the world that the Bible was written in. It is not something where two people just fall in love and they date for a little while and then they decide they're good together and they get married. We invented that for marriage about 150 years ago. It wasn't before that. And when the Bible talks about marriage, it's talking about an economic institution and a community institution. The community institution helps families stay stable. The economic institution is when a man passes on property to his sons, he needs to be reasonably sure that they are his sons. That's what marriage is. If you fell in love with your wife or husband after you're married, great, what a happy story. And there are stories like that in Scripture, of course. But that was not the point of marriage in the Bible, okay? You got married because you wanted to be sure that the persons who got your inheritance really were the ones who were supposed to get it. Luke 16:18.
Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery, and the man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
All right. This is the only one in this little survey we're doing that's the actual words of Jesus, by the way. And in it, he seems to prohibit no-fault divorce. Within the church, though, what we have done is we have essentially set this passage aside, and we've recognized that no-fault divorce is never a happy thing, but sometimes it's a needed reality. Sometimes that's just where people are and need to be. And so while maybe we don't want to say that divorce is a moral good, I would absolutely make the argument that sometimes a lot of good has come out of some divorces. Protestants recognize that persons emerging from the brokenness of divorce need love and community, not condemnation. We recognize that good can come from grace and kindness toward divorced persons. And so I just want to ask the rhetorical question, since we're leading toward, what about same-sex marriage? Could we at least show that same flexibility and kindness towards LGBT persons who wish to be married too? And then the last one is Hebrews 13, verse 4. Would someone take that one?
Marriage should be honored by all, and marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral.
All right, so this passage, the short passage, condemns adultery, which, as a rule, I do too, as a defiling of the marriage bed, and that's good teaching. At the same time, what we want to remember is, why was adultery wrong in the Bible? Was it because of the relational brokenness that it breaks up, that it breaks people's hearts and breaks trust and all that? No, adultery was wrong because you didn't have paternity tests once again. And so how would you know if your children were really yours? The relational stuff maybe was there too, but that was not the main point, and that's not what Hebrews is talking about here. So this is just a very brief skim through some of the Bible's teaching on marriage, and as you can see, some of the texts stood up well to the test of time, and they're relevant today. Others are very different from the world that we're living in. So what should we learn from this? First of all, the Bible has deep wisdom on the topic of marriage, even in texts that don't directly address it. So that 1 Corinthians chapter, the Ruth chapter, not talking about marriage, but I would gladly talk about marriage in those contexts. At the same time, there's some that are clearly talking about marriage, and I would think to myself, wow, those are some weird ones. I don't know that I want to live in the Levirate marriage world or something. At the same time, we need to be careful if we want to say we support biblical marriage, which is a term that has mountains of baggage, as you can see, that's associated with it. One more thing. The point of this exercise is not to prove that the Bible does or does not endorse gay marriage. In fact, the biblical text never addresses the topic at all, because that was not something that people thought about or had considered when these texts were being written. So whether you support or oppose gay marriage, let's maybe start with a baseline of, we're going to be humble and careful and maybe not throw our 46-pound Bibles around to prove our points. Okay. Any questions or comments?
It is kind of interesting just how it actually exists today.
Yeah.
Since it really isn't about the property and the lineage.
Right. Well, let me tell you, I think there's a very simple thing that happened that made how we think about marriage possible, and has also made all these other conversations possible. And that is the availability of contraception, just flat out. Because before that, marriage meant kids and babies. And as soon as you can start eliminating that possibility or scheduling it, then all of a sudden it becomes more of a relational institution. So I think that's a big part of why, maybe 51% of why we are where we are. Yeah.
Although I will say that if you've ever been divorced, you know it's about property and children.
Oh my goodness, yes, yeah. That is so true. Yeah. It is, because it's very personal, right?
What was that? I didn't hear.
That biblical divorce and divorce today is very much about property and children. Like, that's what people will fight about. Yeah. So some of it is still very much a part of it. Yeah, go ahead, Molly.
For a long time in European countries, I'm not sure as much in early America, but the idea that your property went to your oldest son
Yeah.
and your oldest daughter got the dowry and the rest of them were on their own.
That's right. But you needed to have a lot of children because they didn't make it a lot of the time, and so you wanted somebody to pass that on to. That's exactly right. That's very good. Yeah. And a labor force, yeah. That was your Social Security fund, was your kids. So what about the church? What does the church teach about marriage? And I want to start this portion of the discussion by asking, like, why should people get married? What would you say if someone were like, why should people get married? What would you tell them?
Commitment.
Because of commitment. Absolutely. It helps. And commitment is not a particularly trendy value right now, I'm sorry to say. But marriage is a great place to live out a commitment. A really hard one, by the way. Yeah. Commitment.
I think it offers stability.
Stability. Absolutely.
Not always, but most.
But with two basically healthy formed people, which not everybody is, it provides a lot of stability in life. You have better, like even in practical ways, like you tend to get better economic outcomes among people who are married, kind of living through that. And so stability. What else?
I want to go back to your property children thing. My sister does family law. And so she does not tell me much, but just enough to know that what she deals with every day is really, really, really messy.
Yeah.
And so having that legal status, if you decide to move into this house together and get a mortgage and, all those things.
Oh, I mean, all kinds of things. If someone gets sick and you have to start making legal decisions, if you're not married, and unless you've done something like a power of attorney or something, you get to make no choices in that.
Control.
Yeah.
Yeah. When my husband was a chaplain early on in his ministry, he said that when he was in the hospital chaplain, he said the big thing that social workers did was get people married before one of them died.
Right. That's right. That's right. I've heard of that.
Because they'd been living together for 25 years, and if one of them died, the other one was just out.
That's right.
No benefit.
We have another pastor in town who just went through exactly that. Not a Methodist, but just someone I know, and did a very, very fast wedding of people who'd just been living together for 20 years because otherwise they were going to have no legal recourse when it came time for inheritance.
No Social Security.
Social Security.
No Social Security if
Yeah.
you're not married.
And Jeff was also saying, you also don't get to make any medical decisions.
Right.
About the person
That's
that
right.
you're not married to.
Yeah.
And that pertained to same-sex couples too.
Oh, for years. Yeah. Where you would have to hope that parents or family members who you may not even be on very good terms with would make the same kind of choices that you think your partner would make. And so there's we talk a lot about the romance of marriage when we do weddings, and then you're married and you realize, oh yeah, there's like a bajillion practical things that make this institution really important to my personal life. So, yeah.
I thought, that people could designate who they wanted. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be married to have someone be your power of attorney.
That's correct. But you do have to do the legwork.
But you have to have signed a document, but you don't have to be married for most of those things.
But you can't get employment and then cover somebody as a friend.
Right. So there's still like health insurance.
You say a power of attorney, there's a lot of issues around power of attorneys in healthcare settings. For one thing, they need to be durable.
Right.
Because if the person now has dementia and they signed it, it might not be in effect.
Yeah.
And so this family that you have had nothing to do with is suddenly
Whereas
on this list
if you're married,
needs to make decisions.
Whereas if you're married, whether you've thought about it or not, you have all kinds of rights that have been written into your relationship. I also want to point out another truth that we should recognize. There's nothing wrong with not being married in the Christian life. Paul wasn't married. Jesus wasn't married. Lots of good role models there who stayed single. So let's head in that direction. Another theological source for marriage comes from tradition and church teaching. And the church's approach to marriage has similarly evolved over centuries. And so it's impossible to get into the details in the time that we have permitted, but broadly speaking, Protestants believe three things about marriage, three things that make marriage important. Marriage is covenantal, okay? Marriage is covenantal. You have a shared commitment between two persons that creates a framework for love. This is the quote, "We affirm the sanctity of marriage covenant that is expressed in love, mutual support, personal commitment, and shared fidelity." That's from the United Methodist, actually the soon-to-be replaced United Methodist social principles. I need to update this because we just passed all new social principles, but my guess is the new ones will say something pretty similarly worded to this, that we believe the marriage covenant is about love, mutual support. We've talked about this, right? Why do people get married? No one said because you love somebody. That was, I think we kind of assumed that one. Personal commitment and shared fidelity. This doesn't mean that single persons are lesser Christians, just that the marriage covenant provides one arena in which we grow in the likeness of Christ. Okay? But we do believe that there's like a theological angle to marriage that helps us grow to be better Christians.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Just about when we talk about marriage, it's a different issue than sex. So is
Yeah.
there anything in the Bible, are we going to address that later? Just because, yes, it was
Yeah.
be fruitful and multiply, but how
Right.
else? At that
Right.
time, was it?
I think we'll touch on that. Well, next week we're not meeting because it's Father's Day. But in 2 weeks' time, when we go through our theology of the Bible, we'll cover a lot of what you're asking about. But
So sexuality is really what I'm kind of curious about.
yeah, and we'll start by going through those 6 clobber verses. That's the kind of the colloquial phrase for those 6 verses that address homosexuality. And we'll try to interpret those a little bit and see, like, what do they really mean? Like, in general, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Second, we believe that marriage is unitive. So you have a relationship that's solemnized in covenant and lived out in a unitive and sexual relationship. Unites two persons. From our own wedding liturgy, the marriage of two persons unites their families and creates a new one. This unity is also physically reflected in a relationship between spouses, which is, to put it a little more bluntly, marriage does indeed involve sex. And sex is a good thing. Third, marriage, we believe, is procreative. From Genesis 1:28, God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Marriage solemnized in covenant and lived out in a unitive and sexual relationship leads to babies, creation of new life. In Genesis, when God told Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply, he was promising that life emerges from a beautiful unitive covenant. Furthermore, just as marriage teaches us to cast aside selfishness, all the more having babies and children will lead you to live selflessly and indeed sleeplessly for the sake of another person. And of course, yes, people can and do have babies outside of marriage. That doesn't diminish what God is prescribing in the relationship of marriage. And of course, once again, also, there are instances where procreation is not a possibility for heterosexual married couples due to either sterility or menopause. Once again, that doesn't diminish the value of marriage for those people. Furthermore, couples who cannot have biological children can still experience the same benefits through adoption.
And people choose, today they can choose not to have children.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going, in fact. Yeah. No, it's okay. That's all right.
There's a new trend, too.
So, what does this mean for the issue of the day? Which is to say, what does this mean for same-sex marriage and how Christians think about same-sex marriage? And by the way, this is a Protestant lens we're looking through. There would be a fourth thing that Catholics would talk about, and that is marriage being sacramental. And I'm not trained in that. I don't know how to talk about that. So I can give you the number of a good priest if you want to know more. But we don't consider marriage to be a sacrament. We believe baptism and communion are sacraments because they're things that Jesus participated in very directly. But we wouldn't say that marriage is a sacrament.
And do we think that Jesus never had sex?
I have no idea, and I'm not qualified to talk about that. So it wouldn't, I'll tell you this much, though. If he did, it wouldn't ruin who Jesus was for me. Yeah. Right. I mean, okay, little side story here. My last Bible study as a youth director, I worked hard on this one. I was feeling a little misty-eyed or a little sentimental about not doing youth ministry anymore. It was about the calling of the disciples, and you guys are about those disciples' age, and go out and change the world, and blah. I was so proud of it. And high schoolers will ruin that every time. And one of them raised his hand and said, "Did Jesus poop?" I was like, okay, yeah, he probably pooped. He was fully human, fully divine. That's a very human activity to do. All of us do it. Yeah, I'm sure he pooped. Let's get back to calling. He's like, okay, but was it special poop? Okay, but I won't go any further. But that's how the discussion went for that night, and it ruined the Bible study. But also, it was like, I'm standing here talking about it, so I still remember it. But yeah, he did a lot of the things that humans did. And so if he had sex, like I said, it wouldn't ruin his divinity for me.
I'm curious, does the Bible actually say, there are...
The Bible does not mention any instance where he did.
No, I don't mean in general.
Right.
I mean specifically in his case. I mean, does it say only, or does the Bible say, here's a good idea, because of these reasons?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think that would take that could be a whole class in and of itself. When it comes to procreation, like what does the Bible leave room for? Because let's be honest, that's pretty common right now. If we apply these three criteria to same-sex marriage, could we arrive at a theologically grounded endorsement of such a marriage? And I will just tell you, these next three little sections are my opinion, with some study, but they're my opinion, and you can stop and we can talk about any of them, okay? I don't have a corner on the truth on this for sure. But can gay marriages be covenantal? I would say yes, okay? Gay and lesbian persons who are otherwise mentally fit and emotionally formed can enter into covenant with one another. They have no less rational capacity to do that than anybody else. Can gay marriages be unitive? Yes, I would say. Relationally, two married gay or lesbian persons can be drawn together and united through the bond of marriage. That bond can also be physically expressed through a sexual relationship. It's not exactly the same kind of sexual relationship as with a man and a woman, but it's essentially a yes there, okay? Can a gay marriage be procreative? Yes. That's a very complicated one. And actually, I'm going to say no on that. Because a man and a man can't have a baby the old-fashioned way, generally speaking. So? Okay, hang on. I'm going to get you where you want to go. But you can do adoption, you can do surrogacy, but it's not a product of those two people. So I'm going to say no. But here's the thing, and this is where Molly was leading. Of course, gay marriages cannot produce children that are the product of that relationship. However, that's a very deceptively easy place for people to go to and say, oh, well, then we as Christians cannot endorse gay marriage. And here's why. If we do so, we have to apply the same logic to other instances where straight couples, disrupt the procreative function of marriage, such as using contraception. When heterosexual couples use contraception, something that Protestant churches mostly, though not universally, permit, the procreative function of marriage is disrupted in a way that's not really all that different from a gay marriage. In other words, you can't say that gay marriage isn't Christian because they don't follow God's commands to be fruitful and multiply, if at the same time we don't condemn heterosexual couples who use contraception to schedule or eliminate the possibility of having children. To do so is hypocrisy. So if that is the hill we want to die on, and there are plenty of Christians out there that will tell you this, and they're not there's a logic there, right? But if we want to do that, we kind of have to join our Catholic brethren in opposition to contraception.
Or you just say trans works.
Yeah.
I mean, you could go there too.
Yeah.
I would suggest that a gay couple, lesbian couple, trans whatever, can have relational procreation.
Okay.
Because there's more to a relationship with your children than the sexual.
Than the act that created them. I think that's reasonable to assume. So, I mean, procreation, it depends on what you mean by procreation, right?
I mean, the other piece is you have to, look at straight couples that have, fertility issues or whatever.
Right.
And
their marriages are still marriages.
And their marriages are still marriages, but to say that just because, somebody uses a sperm donor, that their kid is not in a relationship with their legal father.
Yeah. So, and I think you're absolutely right. And like I said, I think it goes back to like, what is procreation? Is it just the act that creates a new life, or is it about raising a family and a child and hope,
And an heir.
Yeah, and an heir, sure, yeah.
So I think kind of we're treating these like check boxes,
Right.
kind of, and so I don't.
Mostly because we got 45 minutes to talk about this. That, like,
Right.
we could
But
easily have
this
that
is like
conversation.
book of discipline kind of stuff. Is that
Well, really
these
more like.
are the three things that we believe is medical.
Yeah.
So, is that something that the Bible endorses as a mandatory checkbox?
Right, maybe not.
Sure.
So, I don't know that it does necessarily.
Yeah.
So, if we're so I guess what I'm saying is I disagree. I think that I think it is not procreative, right? Like same-sex marriage is not procreative because the kind of relationship you're talking about is like influential and nurturing and that kind of thing. And I think that anybody that's raising a child, whether they're doing it by themselves or they're doing it in a same-sex or a opposite-sex couple, I think is going to have that same impact or that same kind of influencing and nurturing capacity, right? But the procreative act is something that falls outside of that relationship, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I may be defined originally, but it's evolving.
So
But I
let's say.
don't think that necessarily. So, like, if you have one person who's sterile in a couple, you're saying if we fail to check this box, then that eliminates their ability to be married.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can't check all of it.
It's almost like it's a failed marriage or
Also
something.
saying that somebody, so you have a straight couple, it's their biological stuff.
Yeah.
The egg from the wife, the sperm from the husband, and you're saying that's not procreative, essentially.
Well, in that case, how is it not?
That would be.
Because it's not sex.
Hang on real quick. I'm gonna let Judy.
Okay, I'm gonna just take another angle.
Like in vitro?
Yeah.
Like IVF?
Yeah.
I've had friends who got
Hang on, guys.
married later in life and still, right around 40, so still young enough possibly, made the decision that due to their age, did not want to ever have children.
Right.
So if the only reason to have, heterosexual couple, so, and again, it's not unusual in this day and age for people to get married after 50 or after 60. So if you went strictly according to this, that's not marriage either.
Right.
Yeah.
And has nothing to do with straight or gay or anything.
Exactly. Which is to say, like, let me just say, and I'll get to Regina real quick. This is why this gets real complicated, because it's about relationships. And since when was any of that ever simple? So, yeah, Regina, go ahead.
Well, I think we're getting into the proscriptive, descriptive discussion.
Right.
Is what the Bible says describing what happened or what you have to do.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're getting here to we're applying that same logic to this. Is this saying this is the way it should be if it happens? You have to have children, or we think that marriage is a suitable environment for having children,
Right.
as opposed to
Right.
non-marriage. Okay.
And so let me just say, the reason I want you to understand this is not that you have to think this, that gay marriages are not procreative. I don't care. Like, I don't mean it to sound like that, but I mean, I think you can have your own definition that fits, and they're all kind of similar, but there are some key differences, right? I want you to understand this because there will be traditions and leaders and pastors who are going to say, I've heard them do it. A gay marriage can't be a marriage because it can't be procreative biologically. God created Adam and Eve, and then Adam and Eve created Cain and Abel. Now, whether you agree with that definition or not is okay, but they're going to put that logic on you. And when they do, that's why I want you to understand the thing about contraception, is if that's the logic, then those same people have to be intellectually consistent and say, okay, then we're not going to block the procreative function of marriage willingly, whether circumstances do or not. And we're not going to allow contraception, because otherwise you're doing the same thing that a gay marriage would do under that logical rubric. And every infertile couple there ever was. Yeah, including all the ones that were in the Bible. So, but I understand, like, I can totally see different viewpoints on this, and actually I think a lot of you have a good point. I'm just saying, like, part of why I want to go through this is because this is a lot of the logic that will get thrown at you. And especially and I don't like talking about other traditions that I'm not a part of. But I also, like, in the evangelical world, we're kind of treated badly ourselves, and like, oh, they're Methodist, they're kind of diet Christians anyways, they're Bible light. I want you to understand what they're going to throw at you so that you can say, actually, I've thought really deeply about this. I'm not just some nice Methodist who likes potlucks and being nice to people. I've thought about this. And the way that you've presented this has some logical flaws that you aren't looking at to folks like that, okay?
Josh,
yeah.
Was there any, I'm assuming this will be reworded in the new social...
Yeah, I mean, this isn't really part of it. This is not really written into the book of discipline or anything. It's written into broad themes of theology in the Protestant tradition. So there's not some Methodist book out there that says we believe marriage is covenantal, unitive, and procreative. But you can find writers who will write very much like this, Methodist or Protestant of most any stripe. And in fact, let's also just acknowledge something else in this. This is a pretty dry definition of marriage. Is this why you got married? It's like, I wanted to live in a covenant, and I wasn't part of a homeowners association, so I decided to get married. Or I wanted to live as one legal unit so I could share a checking account and be frustrated with how someone else spends money. Or I wanted to have children within the legal framework. Those are all very good practical things, but they don't get to the core of a marriage, right? Which leads me to sort of where we'll conclude tonight. We're actually getting done kind of early. I don't know how we went so fast, but did I skip something? I don't know. No, I guess not. But I kind of call this one more thing, or sort of the main thing. I mean, what about love? If this hasn't already been discussed, I think we should bring it up now. Most people, if you ask them, why did you get married? I think their most natural first response would be, because I love that person.
But that only came up 150 years ago.
I know, but it's why we get married now. Right. If I get married, that's why I'm going to get married. I'm not like, yeah. No, you're right.
What happened 150 years ago?
Well, in the 19th century, so good question. In the 19th century, especially like you get to the Victorian era and stuff like that, marriage all of a sudden becomes more of a relational institution. And once again, not to put everything on this one thing, but it really does go back to, this is when contraception started kind of becoming available. And then as it became more available, also more legal. Now, contraception's been around for a very long time, but that's when it sort of was available to the masses. And so that changed how people thought about a marriage relationship, because you could take the procreative element out of it all of a sudden. That's what we did with contraception. So otherwise, and I mean, this is something that was very real for women. You read like journals and diaries and things from women in eras past, and they love their husbands. They want to be with their husbands, including physically. but they're terrified because they've already had 8 kids and they almost didn't survive the last 2 pregnancies. And how am I going to make it through this one? And it was scary being pregnant in a world, not just before contraception, but before hospitals and medical care and OBGYNs and things like that. So like, just understand the world that we live in, to your point, is a very recent phenomenon that most of our ancestors had. Like, it is a luxury that we get to live in. Yeah.
I've just been listening to a lot of things. A lot of times I don't like to talk about the subject because it divides people.
Yeah.
I do have a transgender friend who's one of my best friends. Mm-hmm. I don't presume to say what God says.
Yeah.
He says what he says.
Sure.
But what I do know is he's actually trying to transition back.
Yeah, which does happen sometimes.
And he has love, and he has actually love for me.
Right.
And, God puts hearts together, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll decide what is going to go on with our bodies and our hearts. He will do that. I don't do that. But what I do know is when you're focusing just on the sex part of it, what is there?
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't work for any sex, right? Any relationship long term.
We're talking about love. And so I was talking about what you were saying about the love part. My friend wishes he didn't do what he did.
Sure. Yeah.
Because he wasn't listening to just his heart. Mm-hmm. He was listening to some other things that were like, this is who you are, your peace makes who you are. And he said, if I had just listened to my heart, I would have.
Okay. Last week's lesson was on the body, and it's recorded. It'll be put up, and we actually address exactly what you're talking about.
So I mean, he's just like, I know who I am, but I wish I wouldn't, because I feel like some people are like, well, you did this is all you are. He actually wants to come back.
Yeah. Well, and let me take it out of sex there and to the topic of regret. I think one of the dumbest things that we all accept and we just live as if it's true and it's dumb is this idea that we shouldn't have regrets in life. Okay, no regrets. If you don't have regrets in life, and that's a very common thing for people to say, oh, I just live without regrets. That means you are choosing not to change as you grow older and get smarter and wiser and have a better opinion. You could, I'm not saying that I love getting older, but you could not pay me to go back and be a teenager again. That was a horrible time. I was dumb. I thought I knew everything, and that just showed how little I knew. 20s were not so bad, but I was really poor. 30s was kind of okay. I didn't have health problems yet, but like disposable income was all there all of a sudden. And like, we change over time. And so, and that's why, by the way, the Bible talks a lot about regret and where God is present within regret and grace.
And that's that grace, right?
Yeah. So some people do regret when they transition, and they do transition back. That is a thing that happens. It's kind of a low number, actually, statistically, but it does happen. And really, I'm going to end where maybe we will end up here all 4 weeks, but like mostly what we got to do is just sort of be humble. These are all pretty complicated things.
I think the individual has to work through this themselves. We're not working it for them.
Right, exactly, yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing too, is what does it mean to be a Christ-like presence with someone who's making a decision that's different from a decision we'd make? Which every one of you have done, like, have made a decision that, or like, I wouldn't have done it that way. But that's kind of life, right? So, yeah. Yeah.
But what about the societies that they lack procreation, and you look at India and places like that where they have too many people. They have people they have children they can't afford to feed.
Right. Yeah, population is, like on the macro level, population is turning into a very interesting subject to talk about in sociological circles, because there are some places where the population is still rising steeply. Not so much here. Our replacement level right now is 1.62, which is to say we're not replacing because there are too many people like me. At cratering. China. And really the long-term outlook for global population is that it peaks sometime in the next 50 years and starts to gradually decline. But that goes beyond the scope of what I know anything about. So, but it is a thing, right? Yeah.
Then are choices being made or encouraged, and could that be a motivation?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the reason that the population is dropping is because people are choosing not to have children. So
Yeah.
we're back to the same thing.
Right.
Are all these people not, is it not a sanctioned marriage because they choose not to procreate?
Right. A lot of people are choosing not to have children. A lot of people are getting married much, much later, and it's harder to have children.
And Paul is perfectly okay with that.
Yeah, right. Right, what were we going to say?
Well, I seem to remember that a few decades ago, the government was after us, and there was a worldwide kind of thing like, we have too many people. We need to get down on this.
You go back to a lot of the literature in the late 60s, early 70s, and the prediction was that like by the time we were in the era when we are now, that the world was going to be a pretty dark, starving place because of overuse of resources. And the population growth has leveled off in a lot of places, but also it's amazing how much technology can solve problems that are kind of out there. Yeah. Hopefully it keeps doing it. So. All right. Well, let's leave it there. All right. Any last comments, or I'll give someone else the last word if they want it. Okay, cool. We won't meet next week. The week after, we will, like I said, we're going to go through what do we believe about the Bible, and we'll go through those 6 verses in Scripture that address homosexuality directly, and we're going to pick them apart a little bit and try to figure out what do they mean? Why do they say what they say? And what's the world? Once again, what's the world out of which they came so we can understand them very deeply. Okay? All right. Thank y'all.